One portion of fries, $9. A simple burger, $19. A dinner for two, over $300, and still left feeling not worth it. This isn't a fancy dinner in New York or Paris. This is America, where just a few years ago, eating out was a natural part of life. And yet now the restaurant is empty, the menu is expensive, and the people have left. What has changed? Why do even people with stable incomes feel that dinner is no longer worth the money? Why are inexpensive foods from the industrial supply chain sold at a higher price than fresh produce? This is a story about more than just price. It's the story of how greed, inflation, and the economic system have turned the dining experience once familiar to all Americans into a luxury item. And if you think you'll be eating out again someday, think again. When you leave the house for a normal dinner and it feels like you just paid rent, that's the general feeling of millions of Americans right now. And perhaps you're among them too. A few years ago, going out for dinner was a small pleasure after a tiring week. But by 2025, it had become a financial decision. And what many Americans find most infuriating isn't the rising prices. It's how absurdly unacceptable things have become. A simple order of fries, which used to cost just a few dollars, now costs up to $9. A Subway sandwich, once a cheap option, can now cost $8.99. And if you order delivery, the total bill can easily reach $30. A basic breakfast at Denny's, eggs, toast, coffee exceeds $20. And a dinner for two in Miami, unbelievable number, $300. Even though the food was nothing special, these numbers are no longer an exception. According to data from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, the cost of eating out has increased by over 30% since 2019, faster than the overall inflation rate. Raw material costs increased by up to 35%. Labor wages jumped by 20 to 30%. And all of this was passed on to diners' bills. But the problem isn't just about money. It's the feeling of being ripped off every time you open the menu. Consumers are not only paying more, they are also getting less. Smaller portions, lower quality, and colder service. One commenter said, "Prices doubled while portions got smaller, ingredients were low quality, service was poor, and they demanded money." Good. Someone else sarcastically remarked, "Life has come full circle." Eating out as a child in the 1970s was an exciting and rare experience. Eating out after the age of 50 is now also an interesting and rare experience. When prices cross a psychological threshold, that is the point at which people no longer feel the expenditure is worthwhile. Consumer behavior begins to change. For many Americans, eating out is no longer a reward after a week of work, but a worrying expense, even a luxury they can only afford a few times a year. What's more noteworthy is that this cycle is self-reinforcing. As prices rise, fewer customers come, fixed costs are spread across each bill, and restaurants are forced to raise prices even further. And so an experience that once brought simple joy became a luxury people wanted to avoid. And that's perhaps the value shock that's reshaping the entire American restaurant industry. But that was just the beginning of a deeper crisis, where prices and value no longer went hand in hand. In the next section, let's delve into the causes. What made costs rise so quickly? And why couldn't restaurants maintain prices that customers felt were worth the money? When Americans look at an $80 bill for 2 pizzas and a glass of wine, the first reaction is often anger. Why is it so expensive? But the truth is that behind every number on that bill is a complex spiral of costs where everything escalates and it all ends up in the pockets of the final consumer. Let's delve into each layer of that spiral to understand why the cost of eating out has become so absurd. First, the price of raw materials is escalating from farm to table. A burger is not just beef and bread. It's an entire supply chain stretching thousands of kilometers, and that chain is in high demand. Beef prices in the US have risen by over 35% since 2019, as the cost of feed, fuel, and drought have impacted supply. Vegetables, grains, and cooking oil, which are basic ingredients, also increased by 20 to 50% due to global inflation and geopolitical instability. Additionally, shipping costs increased significantly as fuel prices soared, adding hundreds of dollars to the cost of each food container. And the result is that the average restaurant's raw material costs are now nearly 40% higher than before the pandemic, a figure that cannot be ignored. The next reason to mention is the labor storm, paying more for less. If in the past the salary of a waiter only accounted for a small portion of the total operating costs, it has now become one of the largest expenses in California. The minimum wage for the restaurant industry has increased to $19 per hour, and in some places it's even $23, $25 to retain employees.